we're constantly inundated by images, so we sort of take them for granted now. And those numbers no longer shock anybody. It's just sort of in our collective memory and collective psyche now. It's so easy now to share an image with the world that it's being done in huge numbers. And I'm interested in that phenomenon of contemporary culture, the idea of sharing and that exchange of information in visual form. The idea of landscape sublime, the sublime part comes not necessarily from the sublime in the landscape, but the sublime in the sort of the number of images shared with each other of something picturesque and beautiful. I look right past the screen of the computer into a three-dimensional world. And then when I print them out, it becomes a two-dimensional picture with finite, small, edges. It's a rectangle. So I want to recreate that feeling of a vast landscape of a three-dimensional environment. So I sculpt the images into a tableau that create that sort of simulated environment. And then I flatten them out again through rephotographing and printing out that environment. The work, in fact, is physically constructed and shot with camera and not manipulated. So all the layers that you see that look like they have been made in Photoshop are actual physical things that are in the space. I tend to add elements absolutely everywhere. And when I start seeing on my camera screen, and I purposely don't use my laptop for a bigger picture, I want to judge the composition on a small LCD screen of my camera. Otherwise, I get way too distracted. Then when it's just too much, I have to stop. So with this work, I try not to be very dictatorial in terms of the meaning of the work. On the one hand, it's all brought out to the surface, things like, the seductive qualities of photography, the light, the color, the composition. So in one way, I want the viewer to be seduced by that. And on the other hand, there are levels and layers that would be individual to whoever looks at the work.
Anastasia's work has a really interesting social component to it. You forget that she's spending all of this time on the internet mining through lots and lots of images. Those images come from images that are offered by the general public for use by anybody. So there's a real relationship that builds up in the works between her and the people whose work she's plucking off the internet. But somehow they all come together to create these really complex, interesting photographs.
Straight out of college, I got a job decorating windows for a designer brand back in Moscow. So these were storefront windows, and it's a finite space. It's very restricted parameters that I would have to change up bi-weekly. And so this teaches you a lot about composition, having to work within such limited parameters. I have a piece called Glaciers. I've never seen a glacier yet in my life, but I can picture how it would look like based on the images that I have seen. And I wanted to sort of create a visual metaphor for this idea of an imagined space. So I would literally reassemble an environment, a three-dimensional environment, out of those pictures that planted this imaginary scene in my mind.
Something I've never seen before in photography is Anastasia's work goes from two-dimensional, where she's mining these flat images off of the internet, to three-dimensional, where she creates these tabletop tableaus, and then she rephotographs them to become two-dimensional again. 2D to 3D to 2D. You don't see that very often in contemporary photography.
I don't think that proliferation can be stopped in any way. So I'm playing with it, I'm sort of embracing it and trying to make sense of it. The work is really my thought process about this image exchange that's happening. So I live now in Miami Beach, and between the ocean and the creek. And this new series is really made in response to my new environment. I feel like FloodZone is informed by Landscape Sublime. It wouldn't have existed without Landscape Sublime. It is almost like I'm living out one of my Landscape Sublime tableaus. I'm actually surrounded by pictures constantly. The seductiveness of the light in Miami Beach, it's like I don't have to invent light anymore. It already exists here, and it reflects off of the multitude of shiny surfaces in Miami. It is sort of this jungle, but it's so unnatural already, and there's plenty of artifice for me to work with that I'm absolutely fascinated with. What are the odds for me to move to Miami Beach, which is just the embodiment of that constructed environment?